In the previous video, we looked at how you can set up drag drop between two list controls on a UX component. In this video, we're going to take a look at the JavaScript behind this behavior. So before we go to the JavaScript, let's first notice that the two lists are called list 1 and list 2. So in this particular case, the source list is list 1 and the target list is list 2. So this is this list on the left is list 1 and the list on the right is list 2. So now we're going to go and see where the JavaScript was actually added. So we'll go now to our client-side events, and we can see that in the onInitialize complete event, we're going to add in all of the handlers for the drag and drop events. So looking at this code here, you can see that the first thing that we do is we just create an arbitrarily named variable inside the UX component object where we're going to store information. So this is just information that we need to have available to us, and instead of putting it into the global namespace, we put it into the UX object so as not to pollute the global namespace, and then we just create a local variable that points to that object so that we can reference it without having to go through the fully qualified name. Then inside this drag drop object, we're going to just store data for list 1 and list 2. So you can see that for each list we're storing whether the drag is currently active, so what data is currently being dragged and what row number you're dragging on. So this is just setting up some default values. Then you can see here we get a pointer to list 1 and we get a pointer to list 2, and then you'll notice that we've changed the default value for the down hold weight. So the way that we've set up this drag drop is normally when you just drag on the list, it scrolls the list, but if you press hold on the list for more than and the down hold event fires, then you switch into dragging items from one list to another list. So we can control the amount of time to wait before the down hold event fires, and we've changed it here from a default of 600 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds. Then actually let's take a look here at the code. So you can see that if you look at the code here, you'll see that there's a $e.add over here of abstract down, and we're doing it here on list number 1, and then you can see we're doing it again here on list number 2. So basically all of the code from here down to there is for list 1, and then the code is repeated essentially verbatim, just with the variables changed for list number 2. So this code that's highlighted right now is setting up the drag and drop for list 1, and then the code below this is pretty much identical code setting up the drag and drop for list number 2. So let's go through the code here. So first of all, as you recall, the dragging of items from one list to another list is initiated by the down hold event. So you can see here when the down hold, so here we're adding an event handler for the abstract down hold event, and this is the function that we're going to call when the down hold event fires. So we'll go through this and explain this in a little bit. And then you can see we're also adding an event handler to list number 2, and this is on the up event. So this is basically when the user releases on list number 2. So this is the code here that handles the start of the drag, and this is the code here that handles the release. And then when it's repeated over here, the start of the drag here is on list number 2, and the release in this case is on list number 1. So basically, even though it looks like a fair amount of code here, much of it is repeated for one list and then for the second list. So let's pause now and continue in the next video. So we're continuing now looking at the JavaScript behind the drag drop events, and you can see here we're basically adding an event handler for the abstract down hold to the first list .cont ID. So basically what we're doing is we're adding an event handler, so if the person holds down anywhere on the list, we're going to basically execute the code here in this function. So list1.cont ID is just the ID of the list content. So if we actually go here and put an alert on and then run the code, we'll see that what we see is dlg1.v.r1 so this is the prefix that is used for all controls, for all IDs. Then there's list1, so that's the name of that list, .control. So basically if we were to go into Firebug and inspect this list, we'd see that there's a div with this ID that basically contains all of the rows of data in this list. So we're putting the downhold event on that div, which means that if the user holds down anywhere on the list, the event handler will get called. So let's go back to design mode here and turn that off. So the function that gets called when the user holds down on the list is defined over here. So basically the function gets called, it gets passed in an events object E, and you can see that in the function. So this is the code here that's going to get called when the user holds down on the list and when the downhold event fires. So first we get a pointer to list number 1, and then we basically get the row number that the event took place on. So basically we're calling the list objects index from point method, and we're passing into it the x and the y position that the user was holding down on. So e.abstractData.x and e.abstractData.y are two properties that are inside this E object. So this gives us the row number, and this is, remember, this is a zero-based row number. So if the row number is greater than -1, then that means that we pressed and held on a real row, and not say the list header or the list footer or something like that. So then once we know that we've been pressing on a real row, so the index is greater than 0, the first thing that we do is we get a pointer to that hidden div, which is the div that shows the content of the row as we're dragging, and then we get the data from that row. So now this variable data contains the data in the list from the row that we were holding on, and then we get the inner HTML of that row. So basically by looking at the list ID.cont ID and then adding on .index, you can see we've extracted the inner HTML from the row that we were holding down on, and then we remember that LE now is the pointer to this hidden div, and we're going to now set its initial top its position to just 10 pixels off from the current position where we were holding down. So, and then we set the display of that element on. So that means that when the downhold event fires, this little element comes on, showing you the data in the current row and giving you a visual clue that you can now start dragging that row to another list. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now with our discussion on the JavaScript behind the drag and drop events on the list control. So you can see now that after we make the element visible, so basically here this is, you can see now when I hold down, the element became visible, and it was 10 pixels below and to the right of the mouse pointer. So the code that made this Henry Rhodes in this little pop-up box visible is this code over here. So that made it visible, but it's still not yet draggable. We've just simply made the hidden div visible and populated it. So here is where we actually add the drag logic. So a5.u.drag.start is a function in the Alpha Anywhere JavaScript library, and basically it allows you to add a drag handler without having to bind it to a particular element. So what we want to do here is inside this drag handler we pass in a settings object, and the settings object has inside it an onMove function and an onEnd function, and then any other data that we want to put into it. So the first thing that we do is we actually put into the settings object this variable called ddle. So this is arbitrary. This could be called anything that we want. It could be called foobar. It doesn't really matter. And we set this function, this variable, equal to ele, which is this this variable over there. And we do that because we don't want to have to keep on doing $drag ele to get a pointer to an element every time the user moves the element. So this is just basically an efficiency. Then in the onMove function handler, you can see that the onMove function handler takes instance data, which is basically information about where the move is actually, where you are, where you've moved the element, and then also settings, which is this whole object over here. So basically this settings object has in it ddle, so that means that inside settings we can just simply say settings.ddle.style.top to get the current to get the top of the hidden element that shows the drag progress. So inst data gives us basically where we currently have moved the element, and then we're going to again use the 10 pixel offset. So we're setting the top left hand corner of our div to 10 pixels away from where the current drag position is, and we're doing the same thing for the left edge of the element. So this basically so this onMove handler over here is what's causing the this little pop-up box to move as I drag. So that's what's dealing with the repositioning of that div to follow the mouse as I'm dragging, or to follow my finger if I was on a touch-enabled device. So let's go back to design mode here. Then the onEnd, basically, so this is when the user stops dragging. Basically we hide that element, and then we set list.active to false. So basically inside our drag drop object, which is where we just are storing information, we're just going to basically say that we're no longer dragging from list number 1. Then you can see over here we're basically setting the list active to true. That means that when we down hold on that row, basically that we're saying that we're now in a active move situation. And you can see here that we're also going to basically store the data from the current row. So this is the data that we read over here inside our drag drop object. So basically we're just storing the data. So we're continuing with our video on the JavaScript behind the drag drop, and so over here we're basically storing the data from the current row that the user was holding down on inside our drag drop object, and we use the $o.assign to copy the data over. So basically this is now a copy of this data as opposed to a pointer to the data. And then we store the row number that we were dragging, that we initiated the drag on. So this basically code here is setting up the start of the drag, and then you can see here what we're doing is we're adding an event handler to list number 2 to cont ID. So it's the same principle over here where we set the event handler on list1.cont ID for abstract down hold. Here we're setting an event handler for the up event. So a5.d.events.up is a variable inside the global alpha5 object that tells us what the up event name is. So on a touch-enabled device or a mouse-enabled device, this gives us a name of an abstract event. So you can see if I go here and just quickly turn off the comment there so we can actually see what this value in this variable is. If I go here into run mode, you can see that that event here resolves to mouse up. So that's because I'm running it on a desktop browser that has a mouse. But if I was running the same component on a mobile device, then this would not resolve to mouse up, but it would resolve to the appropriate touch end or up event for the mobile device. I believe it would resolve to just an up event. So so here we're we're adding an event to list number 2 when the user basically releases on the mouse, and what we're saying is in this event handler we're going to check to see if we were in an active drag. So if we were not dragging from list number 1, then this event handler does nothing. On the other hand, if we were dragging from list number 1, which means that drag drop.list1.active would be true, then what we do is we get a pointer to list 1, we get a pointer to list number 2, we find out what row on list number 2 the user dropped on. If the user dropped on a new row, or basically did not drop on an existing row, which means that the index would be -1. So if we had dropped on an existing row, the index would have been greater than -1. Then what we want to do is we want to do an append, and the data that we want to append has been stored in the drag drop object list1.data, and we just basically make it into an array. So we call the lists append rows method, passing in an array of data that we want to append to list number 2. Otherwise, we call the insert method, and we do an insert at the location where the user dropped, and again we basically add in the data that the user was dragging from list 1 to list number 2, and then we go here and we remove the data from list number 1. So we have inside this drag drop object, we also stored away the row number that the user was dragging on. So basically this is the code that handles the drop event on list number 2. And then as mentioned earlier, we repeat the code in its inverse for dragging from list number 2 and dropping back on list number 1. So so essentially this code over here is the mirror image of the code that handled the drag from list 1 and the drop on list 2. This handles the drag from list 2 and the drop back on list number 1. So in these videos here we've shown you how you can set up the JavaScript to handle dragging and dropping of data from one list control to another list control. Thank you very much for watching.